So this is John Coster at the Documentary Media Centre, and today, on behalf of the Conflict Memory and Education Project, I thought it was very important to catch up with a very good friend of ours, Conflict Reportage Archive as well, Julian Harrison. How you doing, Julian?
I'm good, mate. It's good to see you.
Yeah, great. Thanks for agreeing to talk to us. Now, we're going to put this out, and Tuesday, the 22nd of March, is a significant day because it is the 89th anniversary of the opening in 1933 of Dachau, the very first German, I guess, concentration camp, not the first ever concentration camp, the first German one. And it also served as a model and a training center, if you want, for want of a better term. I feel a bit bad speaking about these things, but I think, you know, everything that's going on in the world at the moment, we need to make sure that we're still talking about this stuff so people can't deny it, if you like.
Yes.
So
yes.
Tell us a little bit. Have you actually been to the Dachau kind of complex and stuff?
Yes, I think I've been 3 times, I think now, and I've taken Elliot, my son, as well, and Luke, my other son, and it's a place that everywhere, it's like Auschwitz, you know, the place that everyone should go to, and I agree with it. But Dachau it's so accessible. It's you know, it's a suburb of Munich. You can get there quite easily on the Munich S-Bahn. Unterbahn system. It's the same way Sachsenhausen is on the outskirts of Berlin, and Neuengamme in Hamburg and so forth. So it's there. There's a lot of it that still remains.
Because it was quite a big complex, isn't it?
Oh,
People
yeah,
don't realise it weren't just a camp; it was just this whole industrial complex with it as well.
Yes, I mean, I think initially it was a munitions factory. I think that was what it was first used for. And when we talk about Dachau, sometimes you have to quantify what exactly we're talking about. You know, the concentration camp facilities were at the epicenter of it. The crematorium and the gas chambers were also in the epicenter of it. But on its outskirts was a vast array of buildings, the SS camp, commandant's facilities, buildings that were then used to house Russian prisoners of war, and you know, as we talked about before the session, you know, it had a long period of use after 1945 as well. So yeah, going there, it's like everything else. When you go to a place like that, you've got to prepare for it properly, really, because you're going to be seeing things and visualizing things that are difficult, that are challenging stuff, particularly when you go to the crematorium and the gas chambers. It's not pleasant to go there, obviously, as you would expect, but it's a valuable learning experience. And I think any day that you go, usually there will be school parties, German school parties. German education system is very forthright in terms of taking German children to these places, but visitors from all over the world, and it needs to be commemorated tomorrow, because, as you say, 89 years is a long time. And it lasted pretty much the entirety of the Third Reich, you know, given, apart from 2 months, Hitler came into power at the end of January, and 22nd of March, Dachau was opened. Apart from that period then, Dachau lived throughout the duration of the Third Reich, and outlived it as well. So there's a lot to think about, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing the research for today's conversation. What really struck me was the fact that, you know, we talk about the sort of the industrialization of the process for eliminating a people, if you like, a race of people. And it's kind of well documented, I guess, and it's well known for those of us that, you know that it was real. hence fighting the deniers all the time. But I mean, how does it, from your perspective, you know, as someone who is Jewish, you know what I mean, someone who's researched your own family background, you know, we've spoken many times, you know, it's behind me on my shelf here, you know, Reflections on the Holocaust, a suspended disbelief. Where does Dachau, in your opinion, fit when it comes to how it uses what's happened there as a way of keeping that? You've mentioned the German school system, but I mean, from a visitor's perspective, you know, people would turn around and go, oh, if you've been to Auschwitz and if you've been there, you've kind of ticked the Holocaust memorial box. I mean, Dachau, is it a kind of similar setup there? Do they come at it slightly differently? Because again, it was quite an interesting complex from what they had there, wasn't it?
I mean, it's similar in lots of respects to what you would expect to see, I guess. You get there, as I say, it's on the tube system. You take a short bus ride, which drops you out literally outside the camp status. You walk into the camp. There's a memorial. There's more. In fact, there's memorials all over the place in Dachau, and individual memorials to the victims of all those communities. Those sub-communities, so there'll be national memorials to Belgian victims, to French victims, and so forth. There'll be recording of memorials to gay victims, Jehovah's Witnesses, gypsies and travellers, and that's obviously not including the significant numbers of Jewish people that started to go there at Kristallnacht. And I think it's an emblematic. It's emblematic. Is that the right word? The Dachau, I suppose, gets its iconic status for a number of reasons, not just because of its longevity, because it links to so many other things. I mentioned Kristallnacht, which was obviously the state-sanctioned pogrom against Jewish people in November 38, and after that, significant numbers of Jewish people started to arrive in Dachau from the Munich area. Before that, it was very much political prisoners as well, enemies of the state, people who'd basically got on the wrong side of Hitler, lawyers, for example, who had so Dachau, in a way, in terms of its victim lists, includes virtually every category of person that was persecuted by the Nazis, and that in itself makes it an iconic place. Unlike,
they were also saying every geography,
which is broader. Every geography, yeah.
Because they said it had been in existence for such a long time that what tends to happen is, whereas other camps sprung up to serve particular communities or geographies or sectors, because Dachau was from the beginning right through, so he said, and post the end, it tended to have the most that had come from right across the Nazi kind of territories.
Yes, and I guess, the Nazis were born in Munich. The Nazis built up their power base in Munich. So having the first concentration camp anywhere in the Third Reich was always going to be in Munich. And yes, so that all the diversity of people there, it's quite earth-shattering to think about those sorts of things. But I guess Dachau as well, the other reason why it's significant was that it was treated like as a model camp by the Nazis. It was like the first one. It featured on magazine covers. I mean, it seems unbelievable today that, you can get a magazine like Time magazine, a German equivalent to Time magazine. I'm not saying Time magazine itself put a picture of it on the front, but, German equivalents of those sorts of things had pictures of Dachau on it as a sort of model correction facility. The Nazis said people who go there are there to be corrected and then let back out into society, which obviously was one of the many euphemisms that the Nazis used. So it was well known, and of course it was derived by, and the first person that really comes to the fore with it is a guy called Theodor Eicke, who's a particularly obnoxious individual, who was very much the sort of father, if you like, and developer of the concentration camp system. He had his base there, and lots of the future camp commandants that we will know that dealt throughout the system were trained in Dachau. So it was a model facility. It included lots of prisoners from a wide diversity of communities, and it was very much a breeding ground, if you like, for the inhumanity in terms of the way the Nazis treated their victims. Medical experimentation. There were details, I think, of prisoners who the Nazis wanted to explore how long somebody submerged in ice could last before they were revived, and you think, gosh, human beings were used for this. Yes, they were. That was Dachau. So yeah, it's tomorrow's going to be a very reflective day. 89 years is a long time, but you can go there and you can see it, and you can take yourself back in time and see for yourself. And I would urge people to do so. The full horrors of what went in there and what they represented in the Nazis.
Yeah, I mean, Tina and I popped to the Newark House Museum here in Leicester yesterday. We just popped in. They've got a new exhibition about the Blitz.
Oh, okay.
The Leicester Blitz. I think Leicester got hit quite a few times, and one particular night is known as, like, Leicester Blitz night. I think it was the night after Coventry got hit really, really badly. And I was saying to the lady on the reception, someone coming from the East End of London, us Cockneys, we kind of own the Blitz. You know what I mean? Like,
you had it bad.
Yeah, it was something that Hitler did to us personally, and when he was had enough of us, moaning about like he was never going to get us down, he went off to Coventry type thing. It's a bit of a standing joke, really, which is not very tasteful. But I think when you look back at those images that are in Newark House now for the next couple of weeks, and I would encourage anyone to go and visit. Tina said, this one looks like Ukraine. Here it is on our television, or Aleppo, or
yes,
Sana'a in Yemen, any of these places. And I think this is what we need to get away from, isn't it? Which is, these are isolated incidents that you can watch a documentary about Walensee with all of these people sitting around, almost like CEOs or vice presidents of modern tech companies making a decision about how they're going to execute a product, whereas in fact what they were talking about here was the eradication of a race and a people, and that they went out of their way, almost using some of the most modern technology that was available at the time, like machines from IBM and stuff like that, which is the reason why we actually know how many people died. A bit like sort of Phnom Penh's S-21 Chulsling, everybody was photographed, so we know how many people went through there, 18,000 plus. That it's the normalization of what they did that makes it so easy to turn around and see why it could happen again.
Yes. And that is the ultimate lesson of the Holocaust, isn't it? It's to reflect on the fact that in a society compatible in terms of status, economic status, artistic status, probably the most artistic country that probably in the world, Germany and so forth, in a supposedly first world country, at that period of time, 89 years ago, it just obliterated itself and went into this dark period, which seems almost inconceivable now, that it could happen there. And yet, as we've seen so many times subsequently, and potentially we're seeing sort of signs of this sort of thing, I guess, in what's happening in the Ukraine. Certainly the desperation of people to leave the Ukraine, it does sort of take your mind back and think, actually, is this any different from some of the other examples of genocide and people escaping and freeing themselves from genocide? It's relevant. Everything is relevant, and you have to remember these sorts of things, just to be able to get a picture on the full barbarity of what's happening in Eastern Europe at the moment. You're looking at places that are being actually directly, that potentially are going to be in the front line of a conflict there, that have been in front lines of conflicts throughout the 20th century and forward. Lviv, for example, was a place I was going to go to this year. It's a place where significant Jewish communities existed. It was on that sort of main line from Lviv to Lublin in Poland, of which Belzec, one of the original camps, was there. It was there as a purpose to get Jews from Lviv and Jews from Lublin to its doors. And Lviv now, the Jewish heritage that's there, you just wonder, what is going to be left of some places after what is going to be an unescalated conflict. And we shouldn't be obliterating people anyway, but we're potentially obliterating history, and that's so dangerous. So yeah, it's difficult to stomach, mate, isn't it? What you say when you see pictures today that you think, my gosh, this is really different. It's on our doorstep now, and that makes it more relevant. It shouldn't do, because if you look at iconic places across the world where these sorts of things have been happening on a fairly regular basis over the last 89 years, our conscience should always be pricked wherever it is in the world. But the fact that it seems to be, it's in the Ukraine, it's 2.5 hours away on a plane from us. People visit it very regularly. We have a sizable Ukrainian community in Leicester, don't we? It does make all these things come a little bit closer to home. And when you see, what was happening at Dachau, and it's sort of and its iconic status there, and how much that reflected what was going to happen, how much it gave the world an insight in what was going to happen to people who fell foul of the Nazis, whether because they did something to them individually, like lawyers, for example, or whether because they were from communities that Hitler decided that needed to disappear. So yeah, it's highly relevant, and it's an accessible place to go to. So Dachau, please, if people want to have a go and have a look, you can't face the enormity of Auschwitz. Places like Dachau and Sachsenhausen, Neuengamme in Germany, they are places that people should go to and reflect when they're there.
I find the final thing I wanted to talk to you about, and this is a really poor example, but I know when people go to the pyramids, they're absolutely shocked that they're not in the middle of nowhere. You can stand and look at the pyramids and go, look at the masses of the Red Desert, and then turn around and bang, there's all the urban environment. And I remember you explaining to me before on many of your research trips. The two things probably I get the most takeaway from our conversations about your Shoah projects, with the website, which again I'll put the links below, and also with your suspended disbelief book, is the fact that there's that you get off the bus and there it is, or you come back from that experience and stand at the bus stop and there might be anti-Semitic, work with graffiti on the bus stop. So there's that kind of normalization of it. And also the fact that when you're walking around, if you are knowledgeable and willing to spot the evidence, a lot of the architecture is still there. You might have the sort of the visible sort of plaques in the ground and stuff marking sort of homes and names, but a lot of that stuff is kind of hidden, overgrown. Still on the modern bank is still in that old banking building that was that. I mean, do you think it's important that we keep highlighting these things? Because there's a lot of people turn around and go, it's 89 years ago, it's kind of let it go type things. Lots of other things have happened since, maybe genocides and stuff, and I think this is part of some people's denial, is also the fact that it's we are talking about it again, but it's actually probably more important because it's when you don't talk about it and how easy these things are to happen, is that they happen again, isn't it?
I think you're right. I think it's the first thing we need to remember, of course, is that lots of people can't forget about it. Lots of people, the legacy of it all, even for people that weren't alive at the time of the Holocaust, is still so visibly strong, and we are still in a world in which the views articulated in a warped way by Hitler and his cohorts, they're still views that are dominant views for lots and lots of people, and so we can't forget about those sorts of things. I guess for me as well, when I go around places, it's not so much I'm aware of what happened in these places. I'm aware before I go what happened in these places. I've been to some of them 2, 3, 4 times now, so I'm always on the lookout for little things. And I can remember in Dachau, there is probably about 5 or 6 of the original huts still around and used for exhibition purposes. But one of them I can remember is, you look at it and you sort of see that, oh my gosh, what happened in these places? And Sachsenhausen is exactly the same. People who've been to Sachsenhausen, you go into it and you see graffiti. And it's graffiti made by victims. It's what victims were scrawling on the walls. You see the toilet block. You see the sort of remnant. And one of the challenges, I think, for Holocaust remembrance of these places is how much the authorities there let the place naturally fade away, or do they uphold it and keep it and preserve it in some way that maybe then takes away some of the original authenticity of the places. So it's a challenge, isn't it? If you think about the Titanic at the bottom of the Atlantic, there will come a day, decades from now, when there will be very little left other than rust particles. So at the time of writing, at the time of investigating these places, there is an argument that, we need to be researching as much as we can while it's there, bringing to life some of the things that were there. And that's what Holocaust remembrance in these places is about. It's about everyday things. It's the spoons that people used. It's the pictures that people drew. it's just little things, not just the iconic sort of pajama uniforms and so forth. And Sachsenhausen is an interesting one. It's similar to Dachau, but Sachsenhausen probably more iconic. You get to the end of the bus line down a residential home, so there's people living all these places. You get to this sort of end circle where the camp is right in front of you. Then there's a sign to your left saying mass graves 400 yards or whatever it is. So you're thinking, my gosh, this is not just here. Over to this side, there's loads of mass graves, and that was the case everywhere for this, So, and not all of those places are probably known about now. We talk about, when we try to estimate or guesstimate, as we say, the number of victims, we're also trying to guesstimate the number of places in which there were visible signs of the Holocaust. And Germany, sadly, is full of them. There are these places everywhere. You can't, even when you go on a train journey, you'll be going past something that has historical importance, and that has been sometimes left, sometimes adapted. But you've got to go to those places, I think, with that perspective of, right, I need to learn, and then reflect again, John, in terms of what do I need to learn? What are the important things to come out of this? If I had to know anybody, that's why telling stories is so important to individual people, because then individual people come alive. We talk about 41,000 deaths at Dachau. Do we know all 41,000? No, we don't. There'll be people there that won't be included. So we've got to keep going.
Yeah, we have to take it away from numbers, and we have to take it away from iconic striped pajamas, uniforms,
yes,
and we have to take it away from the perpetrators of evil. So, knowing who the commandant is, for example. Yeah. So it's like, well, if you're going to learn the name of the commandant, at least learn the name of a victim.
Yeah,
because
exactly
what happens
right.
is it's about giving ownership of the narrative back to the victims, because they never had that. And I think for me, this is the fine line, I guess, the approach that I was going to take when you started speaking there was, we were talking to the guys at S21, Chul Sleng Genocide Museum in Phnom Penh in Cambodia. This, how do you take this? You stand in the door, there's a metal door, it's all plain now because it's tiled, and, terrible things happened in there. So do you leave that to someone's imagination who's doing a tour of Southeast Asia and they've been told to get dressed because they can't go in shorts and t-shirt, and they're on a booze cruise, and they've just been around Phnom Penh and on the river, and then they're ticking Phnom Penh off down their list of things to go to, and beyond looking in this room and going, like, nothing in there, moving on. What we're into is, well, how do you then bring that alive for someone without moving into Disneyfication of remembrance? Because remember, anything else, when you go to, a military museum, or you go to an open day, or, any kind of, the Imperial War Museum, they're very good with dioramas of bringing things alive and uniforms and stuff like that. But how far do you go with that before it becomes something that someone can visit because they're celebrating that subject matter, particularly with, the January 6th thing in America last year, and, white supremacy everywhere, even, white supremacists being drawn to fight in Ukraine on a unit that's quasi part of the Ukrainian forces. You have to be really careful, because that belief system that ultimately led to the Nazis has not gone away.
No.
You know what I mean? And particularly in America, I think, which is, people have been quite surprised, how many people met at a Nazi rally in New York before the start of World War II. These things haven't been beaten. What they've done is they've been beaten at that point, but they've not been eradicated, or people have not been educated about it.
You're spot on, mate. And I think one of the most disturbing things for me over the last 10, 15, 20 years has been the significance of neo-Nazi and Nazi speech, but also Nazi regalia, Nazi party ethos, people in Germany itself. And I think in eastern parts of Germany, this was one of the consequences maybe of the fall of communism that we didn't potentially foresee. And that has been the rise of neo-Nazi groupings in in the areas that were served by the Soviet Union and its satellite states
It
before
just went underground, didn't
1989.
it?
You know,
It
it
just
just
went
went
underground.
underground. And so,
Mm.
and that's a massive series of conflict, and that can't be divorced from what's going on in Ukraine as well. Ukraine was very much a battle line in the Great Patriotic War, as the Russians obviously call it. But the Ukrainians there were lots of Ukrainians that were part of the Nazi camp system. You know, the Nazis weren't stupid. If they wanted somebody to do their dirty work for them, they would get someone local to do their dirty work for them. And sadly, lots of Ukrainians,
Many
people
stepped up,
from
yeah.
Lithuanians, Latvians did
Mhm.
step up. Of course, significant numbers opposed,
Mm.
more significant numbers opposed and were the victims of the Nazis. But it was very much a contested battle land, because lots of Ukrainians at the time were sort of experienced the initial German invasion of Barbarossa in 41 as being like a liberation from the Soviets. So it's frightening. It's frightening how these things are contested line. You can see some of it in what Putin's talking about, and Putin's his neo-Nazis and references and all this sort of thing. That's where it comes from. It's that historical context. So you're right, mate. We just have to learn. We have to put ourselves in a position of history, but we need to put ourselves in a position where we're also talking about other people's history that have not had that chance, and victims of genocide are at the top of my list when it comes to that.
I think, that definitely one of the key things, and certainly what drives the Conflict Memory and Education Project, for example. I was talking to Ahmed just recently in Iraq about reaching out to the Diwanir archive, and it would be easy to cover the 20-year occupation of Iraq, if you like, by coalition forces, and document that period of time from I used to be in the army, from a British military perspective. I've got loads of books behind me, or American units, by talking to Dodge with his visits there. Whereas in fact, what we need to be doing is coming at it from the perspective of, if we're training young Iraqi women now to use media and community radio to talk about things that are important to them, which is, international tourism. How do we start earning money with, unlocking southern Iraq, the cradle of civilization, the Tigris and the Euphrates, Babylonia and all this kind of stuff. And it's all there. It's just, how do we change the narrative from being about conflict all the time to being a post-conflict, still low resource setting, where we're using technology to help people to own and shape the narrative and tell their stories. It's a kind of citizen's eye, if you like, but on a more international basis.
And I think I agree with everything you've said there. I think the importance of telling stories, individual stories, is got to be at the forefront of this, enabling those that still can tell their own stories to do so. But where that is impossible, let's focus on telling some individual stories as well. Holocaust Memorial Day this year, I did a speech for Obi and Wigston Borough Council, in which I looked at some of the victims, and it included a little Dutch girl called Sally, who was a victim of Sobibor, and I managed to find a picture of her from some website that sort of told her, and there was the statistics, taken from this place in Holland, transported to Sobibor, murdered on this particular date that you go. But what was more telling was the fact that she was known for the beautiful hair that she had, locks in her hair, curly hair, and that somehow brought her to life. It wasn't the fact that she was a victim, that she was a little girl, 11, 12 years old, that had beautiful hair, and you can see it in the picture. And suddenly, Sobibor goes away, and Sally comes first to the importance of your mind, and you think, my gosh, how do we've got to remember this person's name, because she never told a story, she never had the opportunity to tell a story, but she would have been a person that would likely to have achieved, and who knows what she could have achieved. So that's the lesson from all this, is just give people a chance to tell their own story, and where that's impossible, tell their stories for them, and with dignity and with humanity.
Great. Listen, Julian, thanks very much for agreeing to talk to us.
You're very welcome, John, as always. Yeah, great pleasure.
Cheers.